Poor painter. Married 60-year-old millionaire woman. Few days later, he was shocked by what he saw. He discovered a hidden diary in the study. Ariana Matthew was a 60-year-old millionaire living alone in her vast mansion in the heart of the city. She had everything: wealth, status, a life others could only dream of. But after the tragic death of her husband a decade ago, she chose solitude. Her days were consumed by charity events, meetings, and the occasional gathering at her community center. But what the world didn't know was that Ariana's life was about to change in a way no one could have predicted. One quiet afternoon, a young man named Jake entered her life. He was only 22, but had been hired to paint one of her many rooms. Ariana had seen dozens of workers come and go over the years, but Jake was different. His quiet demeanor, the way he focused on his work, intrigued her. There was something in his eyes, something that made her curious. As she watched him from afar, Ariana couldn't shake the feeling that Jake wasn't like the others. He wasn't just another painter. He seemed to carry a weight, a story behind his eyes. But what really caught her attention was his passion. He wasn't just painting a wall. He was creating something meaningful. Ariana, normally indifferent to most, found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't felt in years. No one could have predicted what happened next. One evening, as Jake was finishing up, Ariana found herself standing in front of him, staring into those same eyes. She didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming urge to speak. "What would you do?" she asked, her voice soft. "If I gave you all my wealth?" Jake blinked, his expression unreadable. "I'd make my life better," he answered simply. His response wasn't what she expected, and that was just the beginning. Ariana didn't know it yet, but she had just opened a door that would lead to a life-altering journey for both of them. Jake wasn't what Ariana expected. At just 22 years old, he was nothing like the successful men she had known in her life. There was no arrogance, no sense of entitlement in him. He didn't seem interested in her wealth, nor did he seem particularly interested in anything other than his work. Yet, there was a quiet intensity to him, something that piqued Ariana's curiosity. The more she observed Jake, the more she found herself intrigued. His work was flawless, and he took great pride in every stroke of his paintbrush. Ariana knew a thing or two about artistry, but this was different. Jake wasn't just painting, he was pouring himself into it, and she couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the surface. One day, as she watched him work, Ariana found herself asking questions she'd never thought she'd ask. "Tell me about your family," she said casually, though she knew her curiosity was growing deeper by the moment. Jake paused, then answered, "I don't have one. I've been on my own for 4 years now." Ariana's heart went out to him. She hadn't expected such honesty. But then again, everything about Jake was different. He didn't hide behind walls or pretenses. He simply was. She found herself wanting to know more. As the days went on, Ariana continued to ask Jake questions. He answered each one with the same quiet resolve. His answers were simple, but they revealed a deeper truth. Jake was alone, struggling in ways Ariana could only imagine. She started to feel a strange connection with him, something she hadn't felt in years. But why? What was it about him that made her feel this way? Then, one evening, she found herself asking something she never thought she would. "If I gave you all my wealth," she said, her voice a little more playful than usual, "what would you do with it?" Jake didn't flinch. He looked at her with those deep eyes of his and replied, "I'd make my life better." Something in his answer made Ariana pause. Could he be the one? Could he be the person who would change her life in a way she couldn't even comprehend? Ariana didn't know it yet, but she had just crossed a line that would change both their lives forever. The days after Jake's simple response lingered in Ariana's mind. She couldn't shake the thought of what he'd said. "I'd make my life better." There was a raw honesty in his words that struck her deep. Was he truly that different from everyone else? Or was she reading too much into it? It was one of those quiet evenings when Ariana, feeling oddly playful, decided to test the waters. She called Jake over to the sitting room, her heart racing with a strange sense of anticipation. As he entered, she studied him carefully. There was something magnetic about him, something she couldn't explain. "Jake," she said, her voice unusually light, "what if I offered you more than just money? What if I told you I could change your entire life? What if I gave you everything I have?" Jake looked at her, a little confused but still calm. "Everything?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Everything," she repeated, leaning forward. "All my wealth, my mansion, the charity organizations, you name it." She smiled, half joking, but part of her was curious to see how he would react. Jake stood frozen, not sure if she was serious or just playing a game. He hadn't seen this side of her before. He knew she was rich, powerful even, but something about her offering him her entire life made him uneasy. He wasn't used to having so much on his plate. "Are you serious?" he asked. Ariana leaned back, her expression becoming serious. "Think about it, Jake. What would you do with all of it?" Jake paused, his thoughts swirling. He was young, with so much uncertainty about the future, but one thing was clear. He didn't care for wealth or power the way others might. "I'd make my life better," he said again, his voice steady. Ariana smiled, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was the same flicker she'd felt when she first hired him, but this time, it felt different. She wasn't just testing him, she was drawing him in. What was she doing, and why was she offering him everything? Without thinking, she spoke again. "What if I asked you to marry me?" Jake stared at her, his heart racing. He thought she was joking. But there was no laughter in her voice, no teasing, just an unsettling seriousness. He blinked and shook his head, unsure of what to say. Was this woman crazy, or was she sincere? He couldn't make sense of it. "You want me to marry you?" he asked, his voice shaky. Ariana's smile faded. "Yes. Think about it. You don't have to decide now, but just know, I'm serious." No one could have prepared Jake for what came next. He walked out of the room, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. But deep down, a part of him couldn't help but wonder. What if she was the key to something much bigger than he could have imagined? The next morning, Jake found himself in the same place he'd been for hours, tossing and turning in his mind. What did Ariana mean by all of it? The wealth? The mansion? And the marriage proposal? Was she really serious? He couldn't sleep. He paced around his apartment, the quietness of his small, lonely space contrasting sharply with the mansion he'd worked in for the past few weeks. Everything about Ariana was larger than life. Her home, her wealth, her influence. But this was something else entirely. Ariana was offering him everything. But why? Why him? He had no answers, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Was she lonely? Was this some kind of game? Or was there something more to this offer? Could he turn it down without ever knowing why she chose him? The questions swirled in his mind, and each one seemed to have no clear answer. It wasn't like he had a better offer coming his way. He wasn't sure if he would ever have a chance like this again. But was it worth it? Marrying someone like Ariana, a woman so much older than him, with her wealth, her life. He wasn't sure he could handle it. He spent hours thinking, and then, finally, he made up his mind. The offer was too tempting, too impossible to pass up. He couldn't refuse it, even if he had no idea where it would lead. Jake returned to the mansion the next morning, his heart pounding in his chest. Ariana was waiting for him, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm inside him. "I've thought about it," Jake said, his voice steady, but his hands shaking. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." Ariana's smile widened. There was a glimmer of something in her eyes, something that made Jake feel both terrified and strangely excited. He had no idea what he was getting into, but in that moment, He knew his life would never be the same. The wedding was simple. No extravagant ceremony, no grand speeches, just a quiet affair. Jake had never imagined he'd marry someone like Ariana, and yet here he was, standing beside her in the grand hall of her mansion, his heart pounding in his chest. It was surreal. Everything had happened so fast, and yet he felt strangely at peace. He had never known wealth like this, nor had he ever experienced such luxury. Ariana's mansion was a palace, and Jake was now its inhabitant. The vast, empty rooms seemed to swallow him whole at first, but over time, he began to adjust. Ariana, despite her age, was sharp, intelligent, and full of life, her presence always commanding the room. But there was a loneliness to her that Jake couldn't ignore. As the days went by, he settled into his new life. Ariana took him on trips to charity events, introducing him to people from all walks of life. She spoke passionately about her causes, her community work, and the way she had built her fortune, not for herself, but for others. Jake watched her in awe. She wasn't just a woman of wealth. She was a woman of purpose. Jake began to help her, attending meetings, offering suggestions, and even working alongside her at community centers. He never expected to be so involved, but Ariana had a way of pulling him into her world, a world he had never known. And despite his initial reservations, he started to feel a sense of belonging. But even with all the newness surrounding him, Jake couldn't shake the questions that lingered. Why had Ariana chosen him? What was her true motive behind this marriage? Was it just her loneliness that led her to him, or was there something more? Then, one afternoon, as he explored one of the mansion's many rooms, he found something that made his blood run cold. Tucked away in a drawer was a letter, written by Ariana herself, detailing her diagnosis. Cancer. The words on the paper seemed to blur before his eyes as he read through it. Ariana had known she was dying. Jake's hands trembled as he held the letter. He had known Ariana had been sick, but this was different. She wasn't just dying. She had known about it for a long time, and all this time, she had been trying to build something that would live on long after she was gone. Jake realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had become part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the letter he had found. He spent the following days in a fog, his mind racing with questions. Ariana's health had always been delicate, but cancer? The news was crushing, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt the weight of the situation. Ariana wasn't just some lonely widow seeking companionship. No, there was more to this. Something deeper than he could have guessed. Ariana had known she was dying, and yet she still carried on her charity work with a sense of urgency. But why had she hidden the truth from him? Why hadn't she told him sooner? As the days passed, Jake began to piece together the mystery. Ariana wasn't just passing on her wealth to him. She had planned for her legacy long before they even met. She had been preparing him for something. But what? What did she expect from him? It was late one evening when Ariana invited him into her study, the room filled with old books and the faint scent of her perfume. Jake entered hesitantly, his mind still consumed by the thoughts of the letter he had found. Ariana sat behind her large mahogany desk, her frail hands resting on the surface. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. "Jake," she began softly, "I know you have questions. I know you're confused, and I know this marriage seems unusual. But there's something I need you to understand." Jake swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. The words felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Ariana continued, her voice unwavering. "I chose you because I believed in you. You're not just some young man I picked on a whim. I saw something in you, the same passion I had when I started all this. You have a purpose, Jake. You just don't know it yet." Jake blinked, his thoughts swirling. "Purpose? What do you mean?" Ariana leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. You were meant to carry on my work. The charities, the foundations. They need someone with vision, someone who can continue what I started. I've spent my entire life building this, and now it's your turn. I'm counting on you to see it through. Jake's heart raced, the weight of her words sinking in. He felt like he was drowning in them. This was bigger than just a marriage, bigger than the wealth or the mansion. This was a mission, a cause that Ariana had chosen him for. But why me? Jake asked, his voice breaking. Why not someone else? Ariana's eyes softened. Because I believe you have the heart for it, Jake. I saw it the moment I met you. You're capable of more than you know. Jake was speechless. He had never felt such pressure before. Ariana was entrusting him with her legacy, with her life's work. But was he ready? Could he live up to her expectations? Just as he was about to speak, Ariana's voice grew faint, her breath shallow. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, Jake could see the exhaustion in her face. The cancer was taking its toll. I don't have much time left, Jake, she whispered. Please, promise me you'll do this. The weight of her request was overwhelming. Jake nodded silently, but deep down, he knew this was more than just a promise. This was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. Jake's world was spinning. Ariana's words echoed in his mind, over and over. She wanted him to carry on her mission, to take the reins of her empire and continue her legacy. He couldn't deny the weight of the responsibility, but something inside him felt suffocated. How could he live up to her expectations? How could he continue the work of a woman who had spent decades building something so vast, so meaningful? And more than that, how could he do it without knowing the true reason she had chosen him? His emotions were a storm inside him, and it was only a matter of time before he had to confront Ariana about it. He needed answers. The questions burned in his chest, and he couldn't ignore them any longer. That evening, when Ariana was resting in her study, Jake stood in the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides. He had to know the truth. He had to understand why she had done this, why she had brought him into her world so suddenly and so completely. Ariana, Jake said, his voice rough, we need to talk. Ariana, though visibly weaker than before, looked up at him with a calm expression. What's on your mind, Jake? He stepped forward, his heart pounding. Why me? Why did you pick me out of all the people in your life to carry on your legacy? His voice cracked with frustration. I don't even know who I am in all of this. I didn't ask for any of this. You don't even know me. I'm just some guy you hired to paint your walls, and now you want me to take over everything? Ariana's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. She didn't seem angry, just resigned. I didn't pick you on a whim, Jake, she said gently. I saw something in you that you may not even realize yet. You don't need to be perfect to carry on my mission. You just need the heart for it. That's all I've ever needed. Jake's fists tightened. Heart? Is that all? You've asked me to carry the weight of your empire, the charities, the millions of dollars, the responsibility, and all you say is that I need heart? His voice rose in disbelief. This is insane. I don't know anything about running a charity, Ariana. I'm just a painter, just a guy trying to get by. You can't expect me to step into your shoes like that. Ariana didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at him with a piercing calmness. Jake, I'm not asking you to be me. I'm asking you to be yourself. But to do that, you need to believe in the bigger picture. My wealth was never for me. It was always about giving back. You have the chance to do that now, to make a real difference. Jake turned away, running a hand through his hair in frustration. And what if I fail? He muttered under his breath. What if I'm not cut out for this? Ariana's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. Jake, you won't fail. You'll surprise yourself. You have something inside you that I never had. A fresh perspective. a new way of seeing things. And that's what the world needs right now. Jake was silent for a long time, the weight of her words sinking in. But then, just as quickly as the anger had come, it faded, replaced by a gnawing feeling of uncertainty. Was she right? Could he really do this? Before he could respond, Ariana's breath hitched. Her frail body trembled slightly, and she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, promise me you'll carry on. Promise me you won't let it all go to waste." Jake stood frozen, caught between the weight of his own doubts and the sincerity in her eyes. The promise felt like a heavy chain wrapped around his chest. But in that moment, he understood something fundamental. This wasn't just about carrying on Ariana's work. It was about finding his own purpose. And whether he was ready or not, he knew he couldn't walk away. "I promise," Jake said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it." And in that moment, Jake's fate was sealed. Ariana's legacy would live on, not in the wealth she had amassed, but in the man she had chosen to carry it forward. The days after Jake's promise were a blur. He found himself surrounded by Ariana's life, her charities, her foundations, her projects, all the things that had made her a pillar of the community. It was a world Jake had never imagined himself in, yet now he was thrust into it, expected to lead. The first few weeks felt like a dream. Ariana's absence weighed heavily on him, but he kept himself busy, diving into her work with a dedication he hadn't known he had. The community centers, the hospitals, the shelters, all of them had been supported by Ariana's wealth, and now Jake was in charge of ensuring their survival. But each day, the pressure mounted. He spent long hours in meetings, signing documents, and making decisions that affected hundreds of people. But the more he delved into the work, the more he felt like an imposter. He wasn't like Ariana. He didn't have her experience, her wisdom, or her vision. He was just a young man who had found himself at the top of a mountain he hadn't climbed. One afternoon, Jake sat alone in Ariana's study, staring at the papers spread out before him. The weight of the decision he had made was starting to sink in. The world saw him as Ariana's successor, but deep down, he wasn't sure he was up for the task. Then the door opened, and to Jake's surprise, a man entered. He was in his mid-40s, sharp in appearance, with a confident stride. Jake didn't recognize him at first, but the man quickly introduced himself as Arnold, one of Ariana's most trusted advisors. "I've been overseeing her investments for years," Arnold said, sitting down across from Jake. "I know things might feel overwhelming right now, but I'm here to help. We can take this step by step. You don't have to do it alone." Jake nodded, feeling a slight relief. Arnold seemed to know what he was talking about, but there was something unsettling about him. His gaze was too calculating, too focused. It was as if he was waiting for something. "Thank you," Jake replied, though a part of him felt a twinge of suspicion. There was something about Arnold that didn't sit right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. As the weeks went on, Jake began to rely more on Arnold's guidance, but he also started to notice strange things. Arnold was too involved in every decision, always hovering just a little too closely. Jake's doubts grew, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Arnold wasn't telling him. It wasn't until one late evening, when Jake found himself alone at Ariana's estate, that the truth began to unfold. He stumbled upon a letter, one that had been tucked away, hidden from view. The letter wasn't addressed to him, but to someone else. The name at the top sent a chill down his spine. Arnold. Jake opened it, his hands shaking. The contents of the letter were shocking. Ariana had known about Arnold's shady dealings long before she passed. He had been siphoning funds from the charities, funneling money into personal accounts. And there was more. Arnold had planned to take over the entire empire once Ariana was gone. Jake felt the blood drain from his face as he read the final lines. "The moment she dies, you take the reins. Use Jake. He's just a pawn in this game. Jake's hands trembled as he held the crumpled letter. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. He had trusted Arnold. He had relied on him as a guide through the storm of decisions that came with Ariana's legacy. But now he saw the truth. Arnold wasn't a trusted advisor. He was a predator, waiting to pounce. Jake's mind raced. What was he supposed to do now? The empire that Ariana had built, the charities, the foundations, all of it could be lost. He couldn't let Arnold take control. He couldn't let everything Ariana had worked for be destroyed by greed and manipulation. Jake's first instinct was to confront Arnold, to call him out on his betrayal. But he knew that would be too dangerous. Arnold wasn't the type of man to back down easily. He had his own network of influence, his own power, and Jake was just a young man with a promise to keep. But he had no choice. He couldn't let Arnold destroy Ariana's dream, and he couldn't let him ruin everything she had trusted him with. Jake had to fight back, but this time, he would do it on his own terms. That night, he sat in Ariana's study, poring over the letter again, trying to figure out his next move. It was clear that Arnold was plotting something, but what? Was he trying to take the entire fortune for himself? Or was he planning something more insidious, something that would leave Jake powerless? Jake's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door creaking open. He looked up, his heart stopping in his chest. Standing in the doorway was Arnold himself. "I know what you're doing, Jake," Arnold said, his voice cold. "I know you found the letter." Jake stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. "You think you can take everything Ariana built, don't you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rage boiling inside him. Arnold smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Ariana was a brilliant woman, but she was too trusting. She handed over everything to you without knowing what you were really capable of. And now I'm here to make sure the legacy doesn't go to waste. You'll never be able to handle it, Jake. You're too inexperienced, too weak." Jake's chest tightened as the words hit him. Arnold was right about one thing. He didn't have the experience, the knowledge, or the network to take on a fight like this. But he did have something Arnold didn't: the truth. He had Ariana's trust, and that was more powerful than anything Arnold could ever offer. "You're wrong," Jake said, his voice low but resolute. "I'm not weak, and I won't let you destroy what Ariana built. I'll make sure this legacy survives, even if I have to tear it down piece by piece to do it." Arnold's smirk faded, replaced by a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "You really think you can stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with, Jake. I've been in control of this operation for years. You don't have the connections, the power, the intelligence to take me on." Jake stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Arnold's. "I don't need your power or your connections. I just need the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." For the first time, Arnold looked uncertain, his composure cracking. "You think people will believe you? You think they'll care about some letter you found? You're just a painter, Jake. You're nothing." Jake's heart raced, but he stood tall. "Maybe I'm just a painter, but I'm not going to let you walk all over Ariana's legacy. I'll expose you, Arnold, and when I do, the truth will be louder than anything you can hide behind." For a long moment, the two men stood facing each other, the air thick with tension. Jake knew this was just the beginning. Arnold wouldn't give up easily, but neither would he. The battle was far from over, and Jake had no idea what it would cost him in the end. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. The confrontation with Arnold had left Jake shaken, but it also fueled a fire inside him. He knew he couldn't let the man's threats control him, but the reality of the situation was clearer than ever. Arnold wouldn't just back off. The power he held over Ariana's empire was vast, and he would stop at nothing to take it all for himself. Jake had to act fast. The first step was to gather evidence. The letter he'd found was damning, but it wasn't enough. He needed more: proof of Arnold's embezzlement, his manipulation, anything that could turn the tide in his favor. So, Jake took a risk. He started meeting with some of the charity executives Ariana had worked with, going through her old contacts and documents, piecing together the puzzle Arnold had carefully constructed. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally draining. But with each new discovery, Jake felt more empowered. Ariana had left him more than just wealth. She had left him the tools to fight back, even if it meant standing alone. Days passed, and with them came new revelations. Jake uncovered emails, financial records, and phone calls, all proof of Arnold's underhanded dealings. It was enough to bring him down, but there was still one thing left to do: confront him and expose the truth. One fateful evening, Jake called a meeting at one of Ariana's largest charity events. He knew it would be risky, but it was the only way to gather everyone involved. The ballroom was filled with influential people: donors, partners, board members, people who trusted Ariana's vision. Jake had made sure that Arnold would be there too. It was time to end the charade once and for all. As the evening wore on, Jake stood near the stage, watching the guests mingle, his heart pounding. He could feel the tension building, knowing that everything depended on what happened next. He had the evidence. Now he just needed to expose it. When the moment came, Jake stepped forward, pulling everyone's attention. The room went silent. He took a deep breath, looking out at the crowd, and then, without hesitation, he began. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake's voice rang clear, "I know you've all trusted Ariana's work for many years. You've seen the impact she's had on this community, on countless lives. But there's a side to this organization that you don't know, and I can no longer stay silent." The room buzzed with murmurs, but Jake pushed forward. "Arnold," he said, his eyes locking onto the man who was standing in the back of the room, "has been siphoning funds from the charities Ariana founded for years. He has manipulated this organization for his own gain, all while pretending to support her mission." Gasps filled the room. Arnold's face twisted in shock, but Jake didn't falter. He pulled out the documents, the emails, the financial records, and began to show them to the crowd. "This," Jake continued, "is the truth. Arnold has betrayed Ariana's legacy, and now he's trying to take everything from her, from all of us." Arnold's face turned red with fury, his mouth opening to protest, but Jake wasn't finished. "You all know Ariana's story. She built this empire to give, to help. But this man has been lying to all of you, and to her, and I won't let that stand." Arnold's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can stop me? You're just a painter, Jake. What do you think you're going to do?" Jake didn't hesitate. "I'm not just a painter. I'm the one Ariana trusted, and I'm the one who's going to make sure her legacy lives on the way she intended." The tension in the room was unbearable. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. But then, one by one, the board members began to speak out. They called for an investigation, demanded Arnold's resignation. The room, once silent, erupted into a wave of outrage. Jake's heart raced as the crowd turned against Arnold, exposing him for the fraud he truly was. Arnold, realizing the game was up, tried to escape, but the police were already on their way. Within hours, Arnold was arrested, and the foundation he had built for himself crumbled. As the chaos began to die down, Jake stood there, overwhelmed but resolute. He had done it. Ariana's legacy was safe. Arnold would face justice, and Jake had secured a future for the charities she had started. But as the night wore on and the guests began to leave, Jake stood alone in the grand hall of Ariana's mansion. He could feel her presence, as if she were still watching over him. And for the first time since her death, Jake truly understood the depth of her vision. This wasn't just about money or power or influence. It was about making a difference. It was about helping others, about carrying forward a mission of kindness and compassion. Jake had inherited more than just wealth. He had inherited a responsibility. And now, he was ready to carry it with everything he had.